or at night to learn about critical race theory, and specifically to learn about messaging about critical race theory. Okay, so I have a PowerPoint slide. So let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, so let me start the slideshow. Okay, so here's the really into two parts. First, I want to talk about why it's important that we counter the anti-CRT disinformation campaign that is raging right now, and then talk about what CRT is. Okay, because I think what we hear now out in the media is what CRT really isn't. It's really a disinformation campaign. They're basically lying about what CRT is. Okay, and we'll talk about why they're doing this. Then I'll take a short break for questions, and then in the second part, we're going to talk about messaging, how to respond to the right-wing attack on critical race theory. Okay, and then at the end I have some sample tweets and kind of messaging examples of the kind of messaging you might want to do on this issue. And with this DemCast, I think liberals, the Democratic Party, really need you, DemCast, right? Because this is all about controlling the narrative about critical race theory. And it is through people like you, the digital army, right, that are doing the hard work, right, with regards to messaging. Okay, so let's start by why we must counter. What's the big deal? I think for a long time people have been ignoring the anti-CRT campaign, not thinking it's that important. But I want to try to convince you that it is extremely important that we counter their disinformation campaign. I think we can all agree right now the right is dominating and controlling the political narrative. Generally, I think Democrats are having a hard time having their message get through, especially with regards to things like infrastructure, et cetera. What's dominating the narrative now is critical race theory. Okay, Fox News is critical race theory 24/7. It's incredible. We were at a talk last week which showed just they literally are talking about it every minute, every hour. Okay, why? And well, what is this anti-CRT, what I call extremism, disinformation campaign about? You need to think of it as the 2020 version of the Tea Party movement in response to Obama's presidency. And the Tea Party, right? If you all remember, this is not something we want to remember, but in 2010, right? Yeah, it was in 2010. The Tea Party led the election campaign and they basically took back the House. I think the Dems lost 60 seats in 2010. Okay, and the Tea Party movement was behind that. I want to suggest the anti-CRT movement is really becoming the 2021 version of the Tea Party. Okay, and that's why we care. It's really about the GOP using critical race theory as a boogeyman to try to regain political power. Post-Trump. Okay, and here's how it works. What CRT, the focus on CRT, getting its base, getting the right, obsessed about critical race theory, it's about energizing the GOP base, specifically by activating their authoritarian impulse. Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about this. This is really important. And I wrote a Washington Monthly article which goes into this in greater depth. But here, I want to just quickly run through the authoritarian principle. There's a political psychologist, Karen Stenner, who argues that Trump voters are basically authoritarians, right? They have, they're autocratic in nature. They want, rule by a strong man, right, figure like Trump. They want the government to be to act in authoritarian ways. And she defines authoritarianism as the desire for sameness. Authoritarians want a world in which everyone looks and acts and behaves like them. So, and that desire for sameness means they fear diversity and difference. Okay, and that's where CRT kind of comes in. It's about triggering that fear of diversity and difference. Now, here's the important thing. Karen Center says this authoritarian impulse is actually latent in most people. It actually needs to be triggered and activated for it to become overt in people. And what activates people's authoritarianism? What she calls a normative threat, a perceived danger to an authoritarian world of sameness. Okay, and if you become triggered and your authoritarian impulse becomes explicit, what happens? If you're a Trump voter and your authoritarian predisposition is triggered, you become highly engaged, highly motivated, highly energized, and then you come out and vote in droves. And you also aggressively push forth authoritarian policies. That is what happened during the Trump era. Trump was a genius. Be real, right? He was a genius at manufacturing normative threat to trigger people, the GOP base's authoritarian impulse. Trump did it by the normative threats he manufactured were immigrants and Muslims. During the 2020 election, the normative threats were socialists, Black Lives Matter, and voter fraud. And now in 2021, and probably beyond, it's critical race theory. Okay, and this is why it matters. This is about, just to be blunt, right? It's really about midterm elections. The right is driving the CRT debate and discourse as a way to regain political power. Okay, and they're explicit about this. Christopher Rufo is the main person who engineered the CRT extremist movement, and he is saying our goal as the right is to make sure CRT is thoroughly demonized, and it comes to be synonymous with everything that they think is wrong with the left. So it's not just about race or anti-racism. They're going to try to lump Biden as they're already doing this, right? They're arguing Biden is a critical race theorist, that protecting voting rights is about critical race. They're going to use critical race theory as the driving narrative to get out, to turn out, to push out turnout, to maximize turnout in elections and take back the House and Senate. Okay, this is why we need to counter the anti-CRT discourse. Okay, and we're already seeing the slide towards authoritarianism. News coming out every day about things like, right, you got several states who've actually passed anti-CRT laws, banning the teaching of anti-racism in schools. You got people harassing educators who support diversity and inclusion. There was a recent Tennessee teacher was fired because he assigned anti-racist readings, okay? And there's a website called the CRT Watch. It's a website that monitors colleges and universities and identifies, oh, these colleges teach critical race theory. Here's how they teach it, etc. Okay, so this is Big Brother at work. This is authoritarianism actually activated. Okay, and also it's really, you really want to think about the CRT, attack on CRT as an assault on the anti-racist movement that started with the George Floyd murder. Okay, it's really a backlash to all the racial change and diversity and inclusion that's been occurring since in the past year or so. Okay, and here's the thing, like they don't really want an honest discussion about race and critical race theory. They don't really care what critical race theory actually is. They're going to caricaturize it, butcher it in order to control the political narrative, really excite their base and regain political power. Okay, so with that said, first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about CRE, critical race theory. I'm not sure how many of you actually are familiar with it. The reality is people talk about critical race theory all the time. Nobody really knows what it is, okay? And no one really has read any actual critical race theorists, okay? So I'm gonna start with what it's not and then talk about what it is. Okay, here's what it's not. This is what you need to tell people. If you're engaging with someone who says CRT is racist, here's how you want to respond. First, it does not make the argument that all white people are racist. That's false. That's absolutely false. It does not argue that everything is about race, which is what the anti-CRT people argue. It does not argue that was, is, and will forever be racist. And CRT is not against the Constitution. Some of the anti-CRT propagandists really argue that the CRT wants to abolish the Constitution. Okay, and that's just flat out disinformation. So what is it really about? So the origins of critical race theory has its roots in law. It was started by law professors in the late 80s. And you can actually pinpoint a date. There was the first critical race theory workshop held at the University of Wisconsin Law School in the late 80s, 88 or 89. And what it started off as a response to leftist legal theory called critical legal studies. And CRT arose basically saying critical legal studies fails to adequately account for race and racism in their legal analysis. And that was the beginnings of critical race theory, okay? Critical race theory is very esoteric and hard to understand and complex. So let me try to kind of simplify it as much as possible. I think at the heart of it, CRT is about employing race as a unit of analysis hierarchy, or hierarchy of all kinds, but racial hierarchy specifically. And that's a quote from Kimberly Crenshaw, leading critical race theorist, okay? And critical race theory stands for the proposition that there is still structural or systemic racism in the United States, despite formal equality that exists. That formally we have supposedly a colorblind nation, okay, where race isn't taken into account, but the reality is systemic racism still operates in American society. Okay, that's one of the tenets of critical race theory. I think of critical race theory as mostly about methodology. It's about how you go about analyzing society, analyzing laws to determine how they either promote or dismantle hierarchy. And there are tools called intersectionality, anti-essentialism, and storytelling are different methods used by critical race theorists to deconstruct race and racial hierarchy. Some more CRT principles. One of the key principles is the notion that race is a social construction. There's no real biological basis for race, that race is not a physiological fact, right? It's just made up. And for an example of this, right, was the fact that the Irish in the 19th century, when they immigrated to the United States, were actually considered non-whites and became white over time. That's what it means for race to be socially constructed. The Irish were initially socially constructed as non-white, then became constructed as white through social practices, beliefs, relations, etc. So that's the notion of race as social construct. And CRT posits the notion of multidimensional or intersectional identities, right? That we have multiple identities. We are not, and this is why I say CRT is not about saying race determines everything. No. So for example, CRT says someone can be an Asian American, someone can be an Asian American woman, or someone can be an Asian American lesbian woman, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and that all these identities matter, and sometimes a person might be discriminated against, not just as an Asian American, but as an Asian American woman, and that counts. That relates to what's called intersectionality, right? That there's discrimination that you can't just reduce it to either race discrimination or gender discrimination. There's discrimination that is really a combination of race and gender. Okay, so that's one of the other. And then critical race theory also promotes coalition building among different racial groups, gender, sexual identity, disability, class. It really is not solely about race, because critical race theory says we need to build coalitions beyond race. We need to create an integrated movement in order to further social change. Okay, and then finally, critical race theory comes from a place of nonviolence and the ethic of care. So here's a quote from a leading critical race theorist: to create social change, critical race theory must share themselves in principled and mutually caring ways. Okay, and that's kind of a simplified version of critical race theory. There's a lot more to it. It's very diverse. There is no uniform critical race theory. Okay, but I want you to get at least some sense of it. So when you write tweets about critical race theory, at least kind of a sense of what you're talking about. Okay. Now, I want to see if you have any questions, but here's the thing, and this is what liberals unfortunately have not been good at. Liberals are good with complexity and nuance. Okay, and critical race theory is very complex, very nuanced. But in terms of winning the narrative, controlling the narrative, messaging about CRT must be simple and clear. So that's the question for us. How do we do this? How do we talk about CRT, a complex and nuanced theory, in a simple and clear way to control the narrative, to regain control of the political narrative? Okay, so let me just stop there. I think I threw out a lot. Does anyone have any questions, or should we move on to the messaging part?
We had a couple of questions.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Betsy had put in, how do you think the anti-CRT movement ties in with the white evangelical movement, which is in itself authoritarian?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the bulk of the anti-CRT movement are evangelists, the white evangelicals. Okay, when we think about authoritarians, we are talking about white nationalists, white Christian evangelicals. Absolutely. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Speaking as a ex-evangelical myself, I mean, I grew up in a white evangelical church. You know, we were understood that, you know, the man is the head of the household.
Right.
And somewhere along the way, the religion got conflated with country. Right? So now America is somehow part of the religious narrative, like pride in America is a religious thing. And then when Trump came, they just made him their God. And if God speaks, you have to listen. And I mean, I've been devastated at the fact that I know these people that are great people that go to these churches and just lick this stuff up like it's candy. Meg had a question about something you said about anti-essentialism. What is that?
Anti-essentialism is the notion that there is no singular experience for any identity. So for example, there's no such thing as the woman's experience. Okay, that women as a group, as a category, complex, multidimensional, and you cannot say, here is the woman's experience. So that would be essentialist in nature. So critical race theory is anti-essentialist, saying, no, you cannot. And this came up because the argument was that white feminists would essentialize the white woman's experience as representing all of women's experiences. That would be an essentialist notion. And CRT is against that. It's anti-essentialist. And again, that's why CRT is not, they're not essentialists, right? They're not saying it's all about race. We are all defined by a race. Absolutely not. They're saying it's multidimensional. We're anti-essentialists. We eschew any notions of a true singular experience that defines a single group. Yeah, so that's what anti-essentialism is.
And Kim, if you'll unmute, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question, and I don't know if you can hear me. I have a question, and I also have a comment. My discipline is leadership studies, so I just wanted to put a little piece in here that critical race theory, critical theory is not just delegated to the law or legal studies. We use it a great deal in leadership studies in terms of not just race, but also gender and class and, you know, all of those things. You know, we use it to ask questions like, you know, who gets to be a leader? What does a leader look like? Why aren't more fill in the blank, you know, people in positions of leadership? And ideally, my students, you know, then come to the understanding that with an intersectional approach, that these folks are historically shut off systematically by cultural, institutional barriers, which I believe is this same way in which we look at the legal context, who goes to jail, who gets the higher sentences, and those kinds of things. But it's not just about legal, and so it really plays very, very strongly into these ideas of politics in terms of who gets the lead, all of that. So I just wanted to give a little piece there that it's not just one discipline that uses these kinds of questions and this kind of lens as to how are we looking at our world and how do we make it better.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for saying that, because absolutely right. Critical race theory has now, it started off as legal theory, but it is now cuts across multiple disciplines. Now I didn't realize there's something called critical race leadership, right? Absolutely. Yeah, it's just expanded enormously since its start. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the backlash, because critical race theory has made so many inroads, right? In different kinds of disciplines. And so maybe that might explain part of the backlash. Okay, so let's move on to the messaging part. Okay, so messaging, this is where liberals just, for whatever reason, the right is so skilled with messaging, absolutely skilled, disciplined. The messaging is strong and effective, and the left has struggled with that. And I think one thing, we need to be conscious of what messaging is, and then do it. Okay, so here are what I think are some of the key principles about effective messaging, and it can be summarized as CARS, right? It's SRAC backwards, right? CARS. Simplification. The message must be simple. It must be something, essentially a soundbite, that people listen. It's a few words, one sentence, and boom, people know what you're talking about. Second part, effective messaging, repetition. Repeat, 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 repeat. Okay, if you take a notice about how the right does it, they repeat everything, the same terms, concepts over and over again. CRT has just been repeated, odd not, just add in, just thousands and thousands, multiple times, over and over again. They know the power of repetition. And then amplification, you amplify, right? Everyone is talking about CRT on the right. Repeat, simplify, repeat, amplify. And then coordination. They're so good about coordinating that when they want to discuss an issue, a message about a particular issue, all of them do it all at once, right? That on Fox News, politicians, commentators, activists, social media, all of a sudden they're talking about critical race theory all at once, simultaneously. There's coordination with regards to messaging. And I think that's harder for Democrats and liberals to do, because we're more decentralized. They're more top down in terms of their structure, but we have to be as coordinated as possible. We need to get as many of Democratic leaders, MLCs, activists, et cetera, commentators on the same page, using the same messaging, being on the same page. Okay, and here's the goal with messaging. Create message with instant resonance. That's something you say it and it resonates with people, and people know what you're talking about, and it evokes an emotional response, right? That's one of the keys about messaging. It's about emotions. It stirs up your emotions. Okay, and messaging through multiple outlets. This is about amplification, right? Through social media, op-eds and letters, engagement with anti-CRT activists on social media, also in town hall, school board meetings. We have to do calling MLC. We have to do all of that. Okay. Okay, so what is the point of messaging? What I want to suggest, it's about taking control of the narrative over CRT, and two primary goals. One is to gain control of that narrative heading into midterms. Okay, to give the Democrats a boost heading into midterms. Second, it's to deactivate the authoritarian impulse among the GOP base. Okay, to turn off the switch regarding their authoritarianism, and that will demotivate them and de-energize them. If you take out their energy before Trump, right? No, the Trump base did not vote. Trump energized energized them, tapped into their authoritarian impulse, and then they became this phenomenon. So we need to demotivate, de-energize, and I think the key way we do that is here's the problem. Here's how they've controlled the narrative on CRT. The narrative on CRT is hyper focused on CRT, what CRT is and how bad it is, how wrong it is, how racist it is. We have to switch that. We need to take the focus off of CRT and put the focus on them, the anti-CRT extremists, and put them on the defensive. And I think that's what it means to take control of the narrative. All right, so let's keep going. Let's talk about positive messaging about CRT. So I talked about, CRT is about social construction of race, anti-essentialism, intersectionality. When you message about race, don't mention any of those things, right? Don't talk about intersectionality. That is not going to play well in terms of messaging. You want to talk more about general values and talk about CRT invoking, for example, core American values like liberty, free expression, equal protection, constitutional rights, full citizenship, and belonging. Okay, don't mention intersectionality, social construction of race. Also focus on how CRT stands for the truth, right? Then we want a true telling of history, which includes the racial aspects. CRT stands for truth and reality. Okay, and I think in doing this, we really want to evoke the American ethos and values. The conservatives are so good about making everything about America, right? For them, for their values and beliefs, and that liberals are anti-American. So we need to evoke American values, say CRT is America. CRT is American. Okay, so we need to be better about evoking American values. Okay, so here's how you might here's some of the themes about positive messaging about CRT. One, it stands for justice for all people of all races, not just people of color. Okay, it stands for diversity inclusion. Think about what diversity inclusion is. It's about bringing people together, right? Having people of all races live together, work together, going to school together. Diversity inclusion ties together with notion of justice for people of all races. And then critical race theory stands for unity and shared humanity. Okay. And so here's an example of a tweet I wrote about critical race theory, and try and talk about it in a positive way. This was in response to Nikki Haley, who said critical race theory is divisive. It's saying we should be divided on the basis of race. And I said, no, critical race theory says we should be united, not divided, united precisely because of our different shades of color. That's what it means to embrace both diversity, difference, and inclusion, togetherness. CRT stands for e pluribus unum, out of many, one. We don't have to erase our diversity to be one nation. Okay, so hopefully, I'm just curious what you think about that tweet, but it's evoking American values and principle, e pluribus unum, talking about diversity, inclusion, unity, not division. Okay, I think it's true to what critical race theory is, but talking about it in a way that basically de-radicalizes critical race theory. How can you be against this, right? Okay, so that's one positive tweet about critical race theory. Okay, now here's the, so you want to tweet positive things about critical race theory, but in some ways the more important thing is messaging about the anti-critical race theory attack, the extremists. And there are two central themes. One involves First Amendment and free speech. And I think a slogan that we might want to use is calling the anti-CRT attack the new McCarthyism. And I'll explain that a little bit more and talk about how un-American this anti-CRT attack is. So the first central theme really deals with McCarthyism and free speech. And then these other themes, talking about how anti-CRT is about whitewashing history, dumbing down education, that they're actually divisive and for exclusion. And this is a second big theme. They're about big lies, right? They're not about the truth. In a lot of ways, the anti-CRT campaign is a lot like the Stop the Steal voter fraud campaign. Totally based on lies. These lies about voter fraud repeated over, these lies about critical race theory repeated over and over again, and then it becomes true in the minds of Trump voters. And that's what happened with voter fraud. That's what's happening with critical race theory. All right, McCarthyism. I want to suggest we hammer them, the anti-CRT extremists, as the new. I'm sure you're all familiar with McCarthyism, right? During the 50s, it was based in the anti-communism hysteria, initiated and instigated by Senator Joseph McCarthy, basically investigating alleged communists, trying to ferret out communists, and it was a highly repressive, intrusive time. McCarthyism was really political persecution and silencing, suppression of speech, belief in dissent. If you recall, Hollywood writers and actors were blacklisted if they thought they were communists. Okay. I think we want to take that history of McCarthyism, use what we understand about McCarthyism, the emotions it evokes, and then attach it to the anti-CRT attack. Okay, and so what does that mean? So you want to call them in your tweets, right? This is the new McCarthyism. Talk about them being extremists, an angry mob. Talk about them being cancel culture, right? That's what they're doing. They're trying to cancel critical race theory and anti-racism, that they're un-American, that McCarthyism is un-American, that they are acting like big brother, big government, that they're the real communists. They are using the communist tactics, right? The totalitarian tactics, and that they're the thought police. Okay, that all evokes McCarthyism. Okay, and so central to that is that they're against free speech and the First Amendment. And then you want to describe what anti-CRT McCarthyism, and you can say they're engaged in a political witch hunt. They're engaging in blacklisting, they're silencing voices and dissent. They're terrorizing, harassing law-abiding Americans. They're engaging in thought control, censorship, stifling, and suppressing free speech. Okay, so with this theme of McCarthyism, you want to just really, like I said, repeat these themes over and over again to really get that point across. Force them to say, defend themselves and say, no, we're not McCarthyists. Okay, and then have that debate. That's when we control the narrative, when they're on the defensive saying, trying to defend themselves against charges of McCarthyism, censorship, thought control. Okay, central theme 2, anti-CRT McCarthyism is a big lie. It's all based on lies. Lies about what critical race theory is really about, lies about critical race theory actually being, no one teaches critical race theory in public schools, but they're lying about that. They're lying about America and American history, want to erase the racial aspects of American history. This is stop the steal all over again. This is just like the voter fraud campaign. The right can't handle the truth. So hammer the right, talk about how it's about big lies. Big lies is a great slogan. That is one liberal slogan that really works. Okay, that is a good one. Okay, so truth and free speech, all tied about critiquing the new McCarthyism. Okay, and then, if you have any ideas for catchy hashtags, right? That's what messaging is about, coming up with things like hashtags. And I have some examples here. I don't know if you have any, you might have any suggestions. We want to hopefully focus on one that sticks. Okay, GOP thought police, GOP McCarthyism, etc. Censorship, witch hunt. And the thing about this, the GOP messaging is they're basically lying. Our messaging, even though it may seem manipulative, the thing is it's really based on the truth, right? All of this is true. And so we have the truth on our side. Okay. I want to just quickly move to this. This is a Henry Olsen Washington Post op-ed that he wrote about woke McCarthyism. He used the trope of McCarthyism to attack liberal wokeism. Okay, and what I did was, so for example, the second passage here, today's cancel culture is nothing more than McCarthyism in a woke costume. You can use his op-ed as a template to make the same points about anti-CRT McCarthyism. Today's anti-CRT extremism, nothing more than a new form of McCarthyism. Okay, they are an intellectually intolerant mob. Okay, this is effective messaging from the right, and we can use kind of their tropes, their narratives, etc., to message against anti-CRT. Okay, and then I got a few sample tweets. Okay, here's one thing. As you read about the attacks on CRT, you want to focus on finding examples of the crazy things they're doing about out of their anti-CRT hysteria, whether they're firing teachers, etc. We need a Dr. Seuss moment if we can, a liberal Dr. Seuss moment. And one possibility is, and hopefully I think they'll do some things that will make it seem like they're basically trying to cancel a liberal version of Dr. Seuss. Okay, so for example, Martin Luther King Jr., actually his books, according to certain CRT legislation, would be banned from schools. That might be a Dr. Seuss thing, right? Say the anti-CRT people, the McCarthyists, want to ban Martin Luther King for being a critical race theorist. So here's a tweet I wrote about that. So breaking, the GOP has canceled Martin Luther King Jr. Anti-CRT legislation acted by the GOP would ban books written by MLK for being supposedly racist. Who else is going to be censored by the hashtag GOP Thought Police? Barack Obama, John Lewis, Langston Hughes, hashtag GOP McCarthyism. Okay, so that's a sample tweet about MLK. There was a CRT Republican who criticized To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, published in 1960, and basically argued she was a critical race theorist. So that's another thing we can, you can seize on and write a tweet about, and something like this. The GOP's assault on free speech and anti-racism is out of control. They're accusing Harper Lee of being a critical race theorist and want to cancel To Kill a Mockingbird. What is next? Burning copies of To Kill a Mockingbird over a bonfire. Hashtag GOP McCarthyism. Okay, so hopefully you can get the gist, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about how effective you think this tweet is, any thoughts you might have. And that's all I had. And if we have, hopefully we have some time for discussion. But yeah, hopefully this gives you some guidance and start messaging. Find out, like I said, find out about all the outrageous things you're doing, tweet about it, and let's take back democracy. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so informative, and there's a lot of comments in the chat as you were talking. Really going through, and agreeing with what you were talking about. There's a couple of things that got brought up. One is, when we are countering disinformation, I would caution you that responding directly, specifically on social media, to disinformation actually causes that information to go be flagged in the algorithm for more views. So the best thing to do is to screenshot the ridiculousness and then put your response in the tweet, or make a separate post. What we used to call subtweeting, which is this person over here saying something crazy, and so I'm going to respond to them by not talking to them. I'm going to tell all the rest of you why they're so crazy.
Right.
And we don't want to push that up, but again, we can't just let it go unchallenged, right? And so that's what we have to do. If you feel like this bit of craziness really needs to be brought out, I would encourage you to screenshot that or quote it. The bad thing about disinformation is the more often it's repeated and seen, the more often it's believed.
Right.
The good thing about regular good information is the more often it's seen and repeated, the more often it's believed. So our job is to tell the truth in a compelling way and to tell it over and over and over and over again. And we don't like that. We like new and exciting things. We like to focus on the positives but I was thinking about what you said earlier, the old adage that Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. That's why they're so good at staying on message. It's because they're told the message and they go and tell the message. When Democrats get told a message, they think, do I really agree with that? And let me go do some research on this. And I kind of like the way this is said, not this. And let me just rephrase it in my own terms. And and then we're not singing from the same hymn book.
Right.
And while diversity is wonderful, when we're fighting disinformation, we need to sing the same song.
Yeah.
And really, that's why we created DemCast.
Right.
To be a place where we could put the hymnal out so people could sing the songs. So lots of really good comments and questions, especially about like taking back cancel culture. That they've been all over that, and really that's what they do.
Right.
I have a couple of things I want to drop in the chat because there's been some questions about how do we fight back at like the local school board level. And so I'm dropping a couple of links specifically about like, what do you say at the school board level and, individually. And, critical race theory, they're going to these school boards and saying, we don't want our children taught critical race theory, CRT, when in fact, it's not taught in the schools.
Right.
What they want to do is they want to whitewash our history and pretend like these things that happened in our nation's past never happened. We should be teaching our children the true history and at an age appropriate level, right? But it's not about teaching our children to feel guilty about what happened in our nation's history. It's about us learning from our past so we can do better in the future. And I think that's the narrative that we should be telling is I want my children to know the truth of what happened in our history. I want them to grow up thinking, well, that's something I never want to see happen again. And how has that impacted us even today? There's some good comments here about let's be kind. And I think we can be kind. It's not about they're the ones being ugly. And honestly, they're doing it just to get a rise out of us, right? That's what they want. That's what these trolls want. That's what Tucker Carlson wants. All these people, they thrive on getting a rise, right? And so what we have to do is, just in the South, we call it killing with kindness. And we just bless their hearts and we move on. But you can tell the truth without, coloring it in an emotional way.
Yeah.
She had her hand up for a while. So, Cheryl, if you want to unmute and ask.
I'm just going to piggyback on some of what you were saying. To me, the issue of critical race theory is that the big lie is that your kindergartner is going to grow up thinking they're a terrible person because their kindergarten teacher taught them critical race theory instead of how to count. Okay. So I think it's really important to, keep messaging. This is PhD level academia. This is not taught in the public schools. This is not something your child is going to hear unless they get into a PhD program and want to study it. So that's number one. Number two, part of the reason it's easier for them to have a simplistic message that everybody carries through on is because they lie. It's much more difficult to distill truth into simple catchphrases. And then thirdly, please know that just today, Kevin McCarthy co-opted Martin Luther King, saying that, well, Dr. King himself said the color of our skin shouldn't matter. So he made the white people into the victims in the MLK narrative, using MLK's own words. So that's the way they roll. And you just have to push back against that with truth stated as plainly and simply as you can make it, in my opinion. So, and McCarthyism's kind of a, I get what you're saying. I understand and think you're correct, but McCarthyism, the history of that is a very complex subject, and not everyone's going to get, particularly.
I think the older generation, I'm going to lump myself in with the older generation.
Yeah, we'll get
really
it,
don't want to.
but millennials aren't going to understand it when you say McCarthyism, unless they're just really bright millennials who, you know, read a lot. But those are just my thoughts for whatever they're worth.
Well, and I think what Cheryl said was that, you know, why can the Republicans stay on message? It's because they are monolithic. Who do they represent? They represent one group of people who have the very same lived experiences, and Democrats don't. We want to incorporate all sorts of people with all sorts of lived experiences, and that makes it more difficult for us to have one message that resonates with all of the people under the umbrella. Betsy, you have a question if you'll unmute.
Thank you. And I put some stuff in the chat about this. So I feel like in a way I'm kind of an outlier, not just I, but our group here in Chicago. Most of our following really is on the left, and in many cases much farther left than we are. And I just feel like I don't disagree with the messages that you're giving. I'm more trying to figure out, well, what are we supposed to do? Because if we put out some of these messages, they will be seen as simplistic by people who follow us, and they'll argue back against us, like, because they're going to have a better understanding of what CRT is. And then it turns into some argument on the left. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, what's our role in this? And is some of it just making hashtags trend? And should we just like retweet other people? So I'm just curious about your advice on that.
You do what you can, what you're comfortable with. I think some of the things I suggest won't maybe not lead to the infighting, let's say, over what critical race theory really is about. I think one of the keys to effective messaging is to be kind of operate at a fairly general level of abstraction. When you operate at a general level, it's easier to actually agree, right? To say things like critical race theory is for diversity and inclusion, which means people coming together. How can you disagree with that, right? And so that's response. So if they say, well, critical race theory is divisive, actually, no, we want to come together. How can you be against what critical race theory stands for? No, you have to be for it.
I'm just saying that the people who are following us are not against critical race theory. So what do we...
Knowing your audience better
is
for you to really tailor your messaging. So if I were in your shoes, I would go full on calling the GOP, who are anti-CRT, as racists. They're racist. They are pretending to use critical race theory as a way to continue to enact racist policies and support racist policies. That's why they're against it. And that's why they're using it as a catch-all. So if you've got far left people, give them the fire to go after these people and light them up over this.
Yeah, that's a great point. Audience is so important. Who's your audience, right? In terms of messaging, the audience is the general public and the anti-CRT people. It's about addressing them to say, basically, you are full of shit. You are trying to send your censors, you're engaging in thought control. Defend yourself. Okay, so that kind of language can be directed towards them. But when you're talking to the left, it's different.
If the GOP believed in equality, they would want to make sure all of our laws are equal. But they don't believe in equality. That's because they're racist.
Yeah. Here's the thing about race, right? That's one thing I did not touch. And this is tricky because the question is, if you call them racist, if you're talking to them, not your liberal friends, and you say you are racist, is that going to de-escalate, trigger the authoritarian impulse or not?
Mhm.
And I'm not sure. I'm hesitant about it because it's the danger is that I'll just reinforce their authoritarianism, and then they won't get defensive. They'll say, we are right. You guys are racist for calling us racist.
Well, and
Yeah, so you got to be careful.
I think that's where knowing who your audience is.
Yeah.
And it definitely depends. For me on Facebook, I have half a group of people that I've met in the last 5.5 years that are like my brothers and sisters. The other half are all my crazy GOP people that I went to school with and all my family. Okay. So I'm very careful about what I put on my Facebook page. And in most cases, I will use a GOP speaking out against what the GOP is doing.
Right.
Okay. And use their side to message my friends and family that are cuckoo banana pants, so they can see that, hey, some people that I used to believe in actually don't agree with this. And this is why they don't agree.
That's why using some messaging, I suggest we use their language against them. Why? Because they understand it. They know what cancel culture is about.
Right.
So when
They're
accused,
take back the patriotism. I mean,
right?
Literally in Tennessee, if you weren't a Republican, you weren't a patriot. I mean, and we have to take that back. We're patriots.
Right.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a challenging conundrum, but I think we're getting onto the path of how we fight back about this, and hopefully getting closer than we didn't start pushing back really on the big lie until January 6th, and I'm saying we as the Democratic movement, and it's just challenging. We can't let it slide, but then we have to figure out ways that don't perpetuate the misinformation or the disinformation, and but ways that really tell the real story.
Yeah, because we still want to act with integrity, right, and kindness. We are not them.
Right.
We're not cynical. We're not dealing in lies. No, we have truth on our side.
That's right.
Okay, and the messaging is rude. Everything I said is true. None of it is made up. None of it is a big lie. Okay, so you should feel if it may be hard language, but if it's the truth, right? Calling them on it, thought control, censors, right? Censor, etc. I think we have every right to use that language.
I agree. Well, good thoughts. And this will be posted to our YouTube channel. And we are planning to do a social media campaign around critical race theory, whether we call it about that. I do think it's important to lead with shared values, so that we hook people in with the shared values, and then we say, and if you really believe in those values, you believe in this too. And I think that is one way to do the messaging in a way that's not, pointing fingers and all that. But all right, great conversation. We appreciate you all so much. I did want to give you one little last thing here. If hopefully a lot of you have been on these calls before, and we appreciate your support so much. I'm dropping the link to our bonfire store. It has some great vaccinated DemCast Blue and 22 swag, and this is one way to help support DemCast, because we do get a portion of this as a contribution, and we would appreciate your support as always, both what support you give us financially, but also, of course, even more the emotional and volunteer support that you guys provide. And
I guess just one thing, just would people be interested in the PowerPoint slide? I could send that to.
I think that they would be, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You will send that to me, Reggie. We'll get it out to you guys tomorrow. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.